Some time ago, the powers that be decided that aviation should not only be fun, but it should be regulated. Now, with the powers that be being what they are, over the next several decades, a number of rules have been added. Now, it's not quite the tax code, but you do need to have some rules. It's just like traveling down a highway. Your trips are safer, more fun, and more comfortable when everyone knows and follows the rules. Now, most of the rules you're interested in are what the people in Washington, D.C. call Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations. Now, there's a mouthful. Let's try to simplify that title for starters. Most people used to call these the Federal Aviation Regulations, or FARs, and we'll also refer to them as rules or regulations. Although there are many parts to the FARs, you will only need to concern yourself with Parts 1, 61, and 91. Now, Part 1 is a list of definitions, a good reference for terms or abbreviations. And that's where you'll find the meaning of, say, V sub S0, which happens to stand for stalling speed in landing configuration. Some people call it VSO or VS0. Part 61 contains the rules for pilots, what you need for a particular license or a certificate, what you can do at that certificate level, and what you need to be legal to fly in the eyes of the FAA. I try not to fly into their eyes, maybe just mess their hair up a little bit. Part 91 gives you the flight rules. For example, it's where you'd find out who has the right of way when you meet another aircraft, which is probably a good thing to know, right? Let's begin with some of the rules for pilots. Just as there are required airplane documents, there are also documents that you, as a pilot, must carry with you in flight. Of course, you must have an appropriate pilot certificate. Now, this isn't the kind of certificate you put in a glass frame and hang on the wall. The FAA just calls it a certificate instead of a license. But you also must have an appropriate or current medical certificate anytime you are acting as either the pilot in command of an aircraft or as a required pilot flight crew member. So, what do you need to carry on your person when you fly? Think PM, as in afternoon, although you will need these in the morning also. P is for pilot certificate, and M is for medical certificate. There are some people who have the right to ask you to see your pilot or medical certificates. Who might they be, you ask? I hope you're asking that, otherwise you're bored stiff right now. Well, for starters, representatives of the FAA administrator, National Transportation Safety Board members, or representatives from any federal, state, or local law enforcement agency, which is one of the reasons you need to make sure that you do have them on your person or in the airplane when you're acting as pilot in command or as a required flight crew member. As a private pilot, you need either a first, a second, or a third-class medical certificate. It doesn't make any difference which class certificate it is, as long as it's current. So let's talk about the different classes of medical certificates, who has to have them, and how long they are valid for. You need a first-class medical certificate if you're going to act as captain of a scheduled airliner. When it's used that way, a first-class medical is valid until the end of the 6th calendar month after it is issued. What happens then? Well, the medical certificate fairy waves her magic wand and poof, it becomes a second-class medical. A second-class medical certificate is the type that a commercial pilot must have. That's someone who flies for hire but is not acting as the captain of a scheduled airliner. A second-class medical is valid until the end of the 12th calendar month after its original issuance. What happens to it then? Poof! It becomes a third-class medical certificate. A third-class medical is all that you need for private pilot operations. So to recap, a first and second-class medical become the next lowest class after their date of expiration. The physical form itself remains the same. It's just the class that changes. Basically, a third-class medical is good for 2 years, But the FAA always likes to talk in terms of months, so it's good until the end of the 24th calendar month after its date of issuance. That's the last day of the month, not the date it was issued. Now, the exception to that proves that the FAA does not believe that life begins at 40. Why? Because if you're under 40, your third-class medical remains good until the end of the 36th calendar month after the original issuance, which gives us young whippersnappers a whole extra year. So if you're only doing private pilot operations, it doesn't make any difference whether your medical is a first, a second, or a third class. Now, your pilot certificate is valid only for the category and class of aircraft in which you've been rated. So now is probably a good time for you to know what we mean by category and what we mean by class of aircraft. An aircraft is anything that gets up in the air one way or another. There are 5 big subdivisions of aircraft divided according to their means of flight and power. The categories are airplane, rotorcraft, including helicopters and gyroplanes, glider, lighter than air, which are balloons and blimps and things like that. There are a few flying in here. It's a nice little shot. And powered lift, like the Harrier jump jet or tilt rotorcraft like the V-22 Osprey. But these categories are further subdivided into classes of aircraft. And classes of aircraft, for instance, under airplanes, we've got the classes of single-engine land, single-engine sea, multi-engine land, and multi-engine sea. But even these 4 classes of airplanes can be subdivided further into types. Types are subclassifications and refer to the exact make and model of the aircraft. For instance, Cessna 172, Cessna 182, Cessna 206 are the actual make and model of each aircraft. Now, to act as pilot in command of some aircraft, such as this beautiful DC-3 behind me, you have to have a rating for that specific type of aircraft. You must have what is called a type rating. This is because the DC-3 is a type of airplane that has a maximum gross weight of more than 12,500 pounds. And to act as pilot in command of a large airplane, one having a gross weight of more than 12,500 pounds, or one that is turbojet powered regardless of its weight, you have to be typed or rated in that particular aircraft. In this case, your license would actually say DC-3 or CE-500 right on it. We've been talking about categories of aircraft regarding the certification of airmen. Now let's talk about categories of aircraft regarding the certification of the aircraft themselves. There are 2 kinds of airworthiness certificates, standard and special. Now, most of the airplanes you'll fly will have a standard airworthiness certificate, and the FAA categorizes airplanes with a standard airworthiness certificate by the maneuvers they can do, or for larger aircraft, by the type of operation in which they can be used. Now, these are the airplane categories which are based on maneuvers. We've got normal. This is for your normal, everyday airplane. Utility is for an aircraft that can do very, very limited aerobatic maneuvers. And aerobatic is for aircraft like this one that can fly some really astounding routines. Wow. The standard airworthiness categories based on type of operation are commuter and transport. Now, the Skyhawk can be operated in either the normal or the utility category, depending upon how it's loaded and the kind of maneuvering you want to do. But it cannot be operated in the aerobatic category. It's not stressed for it. So if you're going to do aerobatics like this, you're going to want to make sure that the airplane is built to take it. So this aircraft is certificated in the aerobatic category. Aircraft that have special airworthiness certificates may not be used to carry people or cargo for compensation or hire. The special airworthiness certificates include primary, restricted, limited, experimental, and special flight permit. The primary airworthiness certificate was established to reduce the cost and time to certificate small, simple airplanes. Wow, is that beautiful? Restricted category aircraft are special purpose aircraft which perform such specific work applications as crop dusters or maybe a fire bomber. They cannot normally fly over densely populated areas. And you wouldn't want a crop duster going over your house now, would you? Now, limited certificates allow the limited flight of aircraft that don't meet the requirements for a standard airworthiness certificate, such as old military aircraft converted for civilian use. Another aircraft certification that's becoming very popular is called experimental. Aircraft with experimental certificates are usually home-built, built by individuals. Experimental certificate aircraft cannot be operated along congested airways unless they've gotten specific authorization. Now, a special flight permit allows an aircraft that does not currently meet airworthiness requirements to be flown for purposes such as maybe ferrying it for repairs, exporting it, or evacuating it from danger. So, now you know the different ways aircraft are categorized. One way is by how airmen are certificated, and the other is by how the aircraft are certificated. And now I'm sure you know everything you'll want to know about the categorization of aircraft.